Welcome to With You Podcast,
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I'm David.
And I'm Tara.
It's nice to see you.
I try really hard not to be a complainer in February, but I feel like it's the bleakest time of the year, and I'm just trying to keep a happy face.
I think you're going to be surprised by my response.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Oh.
This has been horrible.
It's really a bad February.
It's been brutal. I know my students today were all very low energy and kind of sad. I think seasonal affective disorder and just emotionally sad.
Yeah, it's not just the weather. It's just a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
In the world, in our community, it's just...
Yeah.
It's the time of year that when summer can't come fast enough, and I forget why I agreed to live here.
Because you love me.
Yeah, lots of reasons.
Please let that be one.
Yeah, it's the top one. It's number one.
Good. Yeah, but it's been hard. But we got to go cross-country skiing, which was the first time in like 2 years.
Has it been that long?
It has.
Yeah.
Well, and partly it's been cold here.
Yeah.
But no snow.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy. Our kids in Kentucky have gotten more snow than we have this winter.
I know. That's the worst of the worst. When you have winter, but not the ability to go out and do fun winter things.
Yeah. My international students are really struggling. They're like, no one should live in a place like this. Right. Why is Wheaton College here? And I'm like, I don't know. That's
what I said.
So we just struggle through it. And yeah, so it's nice. We have our bright light. It could be we consider this our emotional lift up.
Got to get your vitamin D. Do we get vitamin D from artificial light? Probably not.
I don't think so. No, I think it's just
psychological. We just have to muddle through.
We do. Well, and I think we've gotten better at communicating our kind of needs of what we need in relationship. Like you need sunshine, but you also need it to not be negative Fahrenheit.
Well, those are not things we can control, though, are they?
No, but being able to communicate that and me realizing, so we should probably take a trip somewhere nice and warm.
Okay, that's nice that you said that, but we don't.
No, and I mean, we'll go to the same latitude somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I know you're trying to work towards our topic of the day. So we are kind of really busy this season. So it's always hard for us to kind of spend time thinking about what should we talk about when we sit down and do the podcast.
Yeah.
But we agreed on talking about communication, the idea and a framework for healthy communication that we've kind of used in some of our talks, and you developed this acronym, and it's been really useful framework.
Yeah, and it's cheeky like me because it's cheers.
Yeah.
It's good on ya. Let's do communication well.
Right.
And it's gleaned from all sorts of different places. So it might be nice to kind of delve in, but we want to think this idea came from one of our listeners of like, hey, we really would like to hear more about communication. So we enjoy that. Keep them coming because we will be responsive.
Yeah. And when you say the word communication, though, I feel like it sounds like one of those just sort of, what does that mean? Or like we talk about communication a lot, but it really is one of those really basic things that also feels timely for us because it feels like one of the reasons we're feeling bleak is because people aren't communicating really well with each other and aren't showing interest in each other's point of view in lots of arenas in our lives. And that feels hard.
Yeah. And I think they're not communicating well. Like there's an axiom of
there is
communication, but it is painful and ugly and not kind of honoring.
It's aggressive and it's self-centered and it's not healthy.
Yeah, none of that is really good for relationship. And so we wanted to talk about how do we communicate healthy, relationally positive ways?
Yeah.
Because everything you do is communicating, whether you speak or don't speak, how you hold your body, all of it.
That was one of my favorite things you brought back from, I think, when you were in therapy training, and you said you can't not communicate.
Yeah.
So whether you're using words or not, or communicating something with our body language, with our, whatever responses that are nonverbal.
Yep. I don't think we realize that enough. I think we're like, oh, if I sit quiet, I'm not communicating. And oh no, that's a powerful communication.
Yeah.
And
Silence is saying something.
or like our kids when they eye roll when they were little, like, and that's a powerful communication. And
Yes.
so we wanted to delve down into what the literature says and kind of what we've gleaned from 30 plus years of marriage into four major ideas. I know there's 5 letters in Cheers. We'll get to that, but there's 4 major ideas of healthy communication that we continue to need to grow and work on.
Yeah. We're not experts. We've just practiced a lot.
Well, you always say that we are experts on some things. We're not always great communicators,
Yeah.
but I think we do have some expertise.
Well, we've got good experience
Yeah.
and a lot of trial and error and study, all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of it.
And we'll share what we know
Yeah.
and what we've still got to learn.
And you can take it for what it's worth, either just a nice car ride with our voices with you or actually learning something.
Yeah.
And so we'll leave that up to you. So the first piece that
So just to reiterate before we start, so you said this that the acronym is CHEERS, as in like cheers to you,
Yeah.
to your health, which is also fitting.
yeah.
So that's CHEERS. So
Yeah, and
Because
Tara does that because sometimes I have a hard time spelling.
I'm just a visual learner. So if I was listening to this, I'd want to kind of write it down or picture those letters in
Yeah.
my brain.
That's really helpful. And yeah, the idea is it's positive, it's well-wishing to others, and so it spells out cheers, and we'll pull that apart. And the C, so the C in cheers is curiosity,
Yeah.
and this one is really, really important, and it comes from some of the Gottman's work. John Gottman is a researcher on communications and relationships, and this how do I show curiosity? How do I lean into my first response? Isn't I want to tell you something or I want you to understand something, but it's a curious stance of, man, I wonder how Tara's day is going, or I wonder why she's like last night we were working on the couch and we were both staring at each other and we both were like, what?
Yeah, we're both down on our computers and we both look up and we're like, what do you
What do you want?
What do you are you looking at me? Are you looking at me?
It wasn't really
We're both
curious.
staring off into middle distance.
Yeah, we were
thinking
someplace else.
deep in our brains.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it wasn't curious, and so then it became curious. It was like,
Oh, what are you working on? What are you working on?
yeah, what's happening and how are you doing? And then it grew into a better conversation. But it started out like, what?
Well, what's funny is I think of that word curiosity, and I don't know how that translates into other languages, but one of the first idioms I remember learning is curiosity killed the cat.
Uh-oh.
Like
Yeah.
saying if you look into too much into things, it might be dangerous,
Yeah.
right? So that's one way people look at it. But when we talk about curiosity and relationship communication, it's being really interested in the other. And it's always a good, I think when people are dating, a big mistake they make is talking too much about themselves. And what's always better for a relationship is asking questions about the other and then tell me more. Tell me the whole story. One of the most loving things you can say to somebody is, I want to know more
Yeah.
about you and about what you're interested in.
I tell grad students and people that are applying for jobs in interviews, if you can get the interviewer to talk a little bit more, it's going to be a good conversation and a good interview. If it's just them asking questions and you answering and not anything back, and that's the curiosity piece.
Yeah.
It's harder to have a positive interview. So that curiosity can be good for marriage, but it's also good in terms of interviewing. We have a few friends that are really good at that. Like at a dinner party, their curiosity, they have a curious mind, and it just makes the conversation flow so well.
Right, because everybody has a story to tell. And when you learn the story and you learn their motivations and what's fueling the conflict or whatever, it really makes a difference. So it's kind of a stance. It's kind of a place we should come from of a curiosity about the other, but it's also something to remember when there is conflict of a first thing to start with when somebody brings up, something that they have a disagreement with you about. A first question to ask might be, can you help me understand more about that? Or, tell me more about where you're coming from.
Yeah, I love that when you do that. I love that tell me more part, because oftentimes even in our relationships, sometimes, I know this will be shocking to you, but sometimes I'm listening, but I just really want to wait for an opening to tell my part. Even in the podcast, sometimes it's like, I need to be more curious. Tell me more about that, Tara, because it refocuses on, oh, the relationship is important more than the information. Like me being with you here, and asking what else did I get it? Is there more? Really getting the full understanding of what's going on for you before sharing what I have to share, is powerful. Yeah, it's a powerful relational stance.
Yeah.
And it means being open. I get excited about ideas. It's probably partly why I ended up being a professor. And so I like telling. And telling isn't a really good conversation. It's good in teaching sometimes, but it's not a good technique in terms of relationships. It's that open curiosity.
Yeah.
And I get, I can tell when I'm not curious. I know I'm upset about something or something that's happened. If it's us, I get defensive and I lose my curiosity and I want to explain.
Well, I think that's a lot of our first responses when there's a conflict is to be defensive, to protect ourselves and, we'll go into this, but also to kind of want to be right.
Yeah.
From where we
Wait,
stand
what?
from. Wait, what? But that curious stance also prevents us from just running with assumptions. I think that's a big thing that leads to conflict is assumptions we make about each other and we don't clear them up. And so we're operating off of something that might not even be true about the way the person thinks about us or whatever.
Yeah, I was just came home from teaching and we were teaching about attachment theory in development. And the question was, how is love and attachment similar and different? And people started running off ideas, but the assumption was we all knew what love was and we all knew what attachment was. And when we paused and it's like, okay, so what are we really talking about?
Yeah.
It shifted the whole conversation. We had to slow down and make sure we were all on the same page of what is the definition of love? What is the definition of attachment? What are we talking about? Because a lot of times I'll say things with assumptions that you know what I'm talking about. And I usually come in mid-conversation in my head to you.
I know. Sometimes I have to stop you and say, wait. You're assuming I'm already 10 minutes into whatever the thought was in your head. You need to back it up and bring me through the beginning and then we'll
and
get there.
And the way you do that is really supportive because you're like, I want to get this. Can we slow down? And can you kind of go back to the start? That helps when you're like, I don't understand and explain yourself. That's not a curious stance. And then I get defensive as well. So that the curiosity, even when we have to go back, it's not making assumptions, being open. I love it when we do that. And I need to remember.
Well, I think it helps in reverse too, because if you say that to me, wait, take me through this from the beginning. Tell me what you're thinking. It helps the talker to clarify their thoughts too, because you might get just ahead of yourself with emotion and stuff and not really be thinking through, why am I saying this? And so just start at the beginning. It kind of helps both of us through the process.
Yeah. So can you, last night you had a long day yesterday.
I had a really long day.
Can you tell me about how class went? Because you got home, you were wiped out, and we just kind of basically did some finishing up of things and went to bed. Of how was your class?
Are we practicing?
Yeah,
this?
I thought we'd role play. Do I have to say let's role play? Let's just go into it.
No, I mean. I don't want to talk through my whole childbirth class tonight.
Oh, interesting.
But thanks for asking.
Tell me more about that. Right. But yeah, so if it wasn't here, but it's something like that.
Right.
I'm curious. I saw how tired you were. I want to know what was going on and being able to go there.
Yeah.
And then
just showing interest in the other already diffuses some potential conflict.
Yeah.
Right. Before it even starts, just showing, this is a lot of what we're talking about in this framework is not just very reactive sort of techniques. A lot of it is proactive and helps us kind of soften it before we even get into a big conflict.
Yeah, and you need to have that on front of mind. And I think we do that. Like we did that when we were dating. You were amazing with curiosity because you'd take the train into Chicago, read the newspaper, you'd read the sports section of the newspaper, and you'd come home and blow my mind with talking about
Well,
baseball.
I was just trying to impress you.
Well, but you knew what was important to me.
Yeah.
And you wanted to show interest in the game, and you were curious. You're like, can you believe that Albert Bell trade? And I'm like, when did you know who Albert Bell was? It was a little shocking, but we spent a lot of time being intentional to connect and to be curious about each other's life. And then we got further into our relationship with kids, and we became less curious and more survival mode.
Well, sometimes you're just bare minimum survival. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe curiosity then looked like, you okay?
Sometimes it is like that even now. Like, you okay? Yeah, kind of. You okay? All right. What do we need to do? We need to sleep. Okay.
Yeah. Or do you want to just take the car and drive away for a little bit and come back? But so I think different life cycle stages, whether it's newly married, dating, with kids, with teenagers, the curiosity is going to look different.
Yeah.
And because you might not have a lot of time, or you might not have a lot of emotional space.
But it can be small things, it really can. It can be just small ways of showing interest in the other. But also, like your point is too, it does take intentional time sometimes of really making a point to set time aside where you can go a little deeper than just, hey, you good? You good? Yeah. I'm good. Okay. I'm not so good. Can't really talk about it right now, and really kind of dive in, because then we're kind of on a shorter fuse when we don't have that time to go deeper.
Yeah. And you feel like you're with each other, even if you don't have all the information. I mean, it's just kind of, I think of kids where they're like out running about and they have to come back and touch mom or dad for a little bit and then go out and play. I think we have to do that in communication with each other, in relationship, of just checking in. I have a buddy at school, and life has been hard. And so I just like, how you doing? And we only had 3 minutes, but it's stopping, being intentional with the curiosity.
Right. Well, and I think it also meets one of our deepest needs as humans. As humans, we really want to be seen, known, and understood.
Yeah.
And curiosity kind of goes right to that. Like, I see you, I want to know more about you, I want to understand.
Yeah.
And just even that, being asked that question can go a long way.
Yeah, I think so. Is there more to that you have? I'm really,
I think we need to move on.
I do too, but I wanted to practice one more time of like, is there more, honey? And it can be okay. That, like, that's not rejection. It's like, nope, time to move on to H. Yeah. Or as the Brits say, H. We've been watching a lot of British television. So, so H, humility.
Yeah. Humility.
This is yours.
Humility is a hard one.
I'm not sure I have this one.
I always want to break out in that song.
What song?
So I tried to pull up a YouTube of it for a presentation. It's hard to find a good, rendition of it, but it's, I don't want to sing on the microphone.
I'm curious about
it. Oh, Lord, it's hard to be humble. And
it's
a Southern accent.
Every way.
I can't wait to look in the mirror.
I get better looking each day.
Yeah, exactly.
To know me is to love me. I must be one of a man.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord, it's hard to be humble.
Okay, we're doing the whole thing, folks. I'm sorry.
Well, we're just doing the best that we can.
So, that song always runs through my head when I think about humility, because it's about the opposite of that.
Yeah, yeah, that's not humility.
That's humility.
Bravado.
I don't think we have to look hard to find the opposite of humility in ourselves or in the world right now.
I think our humility was our willingness to sing that song, knowing how well we sing.
I wasn't so willing. My pride is strong.
But yeah, humility isn't a natural trait in terms of relationship of like, I know I want you to think well of me.
Yeah.
And as your husband, as your podcast partner, as whatever. And so sometimes I'm going to puff myself up a little bit more than I am going to have a humble stance, because I might not feel great about myself and I want you to see me in the best light, which doesn't lead to humility.
Right. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard to tell. It's kind of one of those things. It's like, just be humble. It's hard to just be something or take that stance. But I think the idea of humility is intentionally telling yourself, I am not the most important person in the room.
Yeah.
I might not know everything, and I might not be right about this.
Yeah. You
And
had me
even
until
just,
that last one.
I mean, just being honest, you might be right about some things,
Yeah.
but just taking that stance of not coming from, I am here to prove that I'm right about this, or to shut down your argument, to be open to the idea that, I'm going to listen to your side of the story, and then I might be wrong, and then I'm open to admitting I'm wrong.
Yeah. When we were talking through this, we were struggling with two H's. The other H is humor, because I think humor can be helpful in humility of like, just, we have to find this situation funny.
Yeah.
And it kind of eases up. It's humor that we can be in together versus like at your expense. Cause
It's
humor,
a tricky thing, though.
yeah,
It's a skill you have, and you're good at using humor to kind of, help relationships,
yeah,
be
diffuse and us not
diffuse
be
and
too
soften. But
petty. Yeah.
it can be cutting if it's not used right. It can be not appropriate timing. So I think people have to be
Defensive.
careful
Yeah.
with humor, and that you have to know how to read the room.
Well, that's why we went to humility rather than humor, because there
Yes.
was just way too many pitfalls.
Yeah.
But the other part of humility is vulnerability. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
of like, to be humble means I'm open to you seeing me, maybe the way I see myself.
Yeah.
And that's hard. So the first one, curiosity, is my relational stance to you.
Mm-hmm.
Humility is my relational stance to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And am I willing to like really be honest?
Yeah.
Like you're saying, I don't know things.
That's another
Professors,
H. Honesty.
honesty. Yeah, let's just stick with humility. But with like
Yeah.
professors, you're supposed to know stuff. And so I think the strongest professors I know are ones that say, I don't know, or let's look that up, or can I get back to you? That's epistemic humility or professional humility of
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know everything, and I'm trusting you enough, I'm interacting with you enough to say, yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
In our relationship, it can be hard sometimes in a couple's relationship to
Yeah.
be humble,
Yeah.
because it's about being vulnerable.
Right.
And
And it's hard in a parenting relationship too, to admit to your children that you're wrong, or that you handled that wrong.
oh no, we're not going to do that.
You looked really stunned there
No,
for a minute.
I'm like, what?
It's not just about us.
Oh, that's
All
right.
of our relationships. I mean, that's the truth of it, because
Yeah.
we want to be in a certain, place of authority sometimes with our children, or have respect, or have trust.
Can you think of a good example where your parents or I can think of my parents, maybe you think about your parents, where they showed that humility. It was the one time I heard my dad swear. So we were somewhere doing something, and a telephone, the old big black telephones,
I remember
fell on
those.
his head,
Ouch.
and he said, owie, in a really loud
Said
voice.
a different
Yeah,
word.
yeah, yeah. A very descriptive owie sound. And then later at dinner, he's like, David, Nathan, I need to talk with you. That, it hurt my head. I responded. That wasn't how I wanted to respond. It was a vulnerable, like, this, I know we talk about cursing and we don't want you to do it. He had to take a humble stance of like, I violated that. And it stuck with me. I mean, I was like 12, and it stuck with me that he was, I was going to say man enough. I think he was strong enough to be vulnerable and to go, I'm not perfect, sons, and I want to be a model for you in messing up. And how do we comport ourselves? And it's really stuck with me of like, I try to do that. I mean, I'm stubborn, so I think I have to fight you first before I come to the vulnerable humility.
If we're going to be totally honest,
Yeah.
I think both of us as firstborns and kind of people who like to lead, and it is harder for both of us to take that stance.
And with each other.
Yeah.
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 I joke that we both are right, but then when I tell my students, I'm like, and you all know who is really right, because I get the last word with them. But that's wrong. That's not humble.
So it's something we're always working on, but it really helps in terms of conflict. If both people are keep going at it to prove that they're the one that's right and are not willing to take a step down and listen, it's really kind of a never ending thing.
Yeah. And the battles, I think our biggest fights have been us trying to argue the truth of the matter rather than listening to the effect of, regardless of what happened, here's the effect that's happening
Thing is,
for
I
us.
think we both compromise pretty quickly.
Yeah, we do.
And give deference to the other in different situations. I think it's more the small things that we're just like, I'm doing it this way, and
Yeah,
we just
or you'll go, why are we driving this way? And I'm like, because I'm driving and I want to
then
go
say,
this way.
oh well.
but implicit in that question. So that's not a curiosity question.
No,
that's a question
that's
like you're going the wrong way. Yeah. At least we both know that it might look like curiosity, but it really is
and
a
I
dig.
know that it makes you mad, and then I know you're going to take a longer route anyway, just to have
which
control.
also isn't humility. It's just to make a point.
And those are the small things that we know we kind of, rub each other the wrong way on, but it's not the big. I think on the big things, we're better at compromise and taking a humble stance.
But it's a trust thing. Like the big things, we trust each other, and the little things, we just need something to fight over. Because
and it's just daily life,
But I think even that, of the ability to look at it, I think admitting we're wrong is part of that vulnerability.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
Yeah. So let's.
Do you want to role play?
No.
Oh, okay. Direct communication is good too at times.
I've gotten better at that.
Yep. Nope. Not going to do that. All right. Let's go on to E.
Let's go on to E.
The first E.
Yeah. So the first E is for empathy.
Yeah.
And that's a hard one for some people to understand the definition. What is the difference between empathy and sympathy? What does it mean to have empathy for somebody?
You saw a good video on that. Can you
I wish I
explain
could
the difference
show that
between
in
empathy?
here.
Well, maybe on the video we can show it on the video.
So one thing that's
we'll pause for the video.
So empathy is entering into somebody else's experience and acknowledging their feelings about it, not acknowledging somebody else's emotion.
Yeah.
Seeing that, trying to enter into it with them.
Yeah.
Sympathy is more like, I'm sorry for you.
Yeah.
And in this video, one of the stances that's not empathy is, you tell me something bad that happened to you.
I was going to tell a real thing. This week is not the week
Just say you fell down on the ice.
Okay. I was trying to get in the car. I slipped on the ice and ended up under the driver's door. Embarrassed the heck out of me.
Well, at least only 5 people saw you. Like, it wasn't that bad.
Oh, I don't like that at all.
Right? So anything that starts with at least is not an empathetic response.
Or you know what happened to me. So I might give you a one up. Well, you fell. I fell on the ice
and fell under the car, but I fell on the ice and broke my elbow and was in the hospital for 5 days. That's not, you think you're entering in because you're sharing a similar experience.
And you're not.
That's not entering in.
And then there's the sympathy of where you kind of want to be witness to like the car crash, or there's like, and wanting to be part of it by showing that you care, but showing that you care by saying, aw.
And that's a bummer. That's too bad for you.
And empathy is entering in, but there's I want to classify here, like we want to have empathy. And if you don't have any empathy, that's a diagnosis. So you should probably talk to somebody. But with empathy, it really builds connection. Like, I'm with you in this. I'm going to walk hand in hand with you. I can't do anything about it, but I get it. And I want to want to understand
That's a good distinction too. It's not trying to solve it or fix it.
Mm-mm.
It's really entering in.
Yeah.
One situation I can remember that's really sticks in my brain is when we lived in Georgia and I had a miscarriage, and it was a really sad time. But it was weird because often when those things happen, it happens before the public knows about it. So you're kind of living with it alone.
Yeah.
In Georgia, it's socially, people talk more and longer to you usually.
Mm-hmm.
And in the little place where we lived, there was the male person who was a young lady would knock on the door to hand me she could put it in the mailbox, but she would knock on the door to hand me my mail, and then she would chat for a while. I don't know how she got through her route, but, so I kind of knew her a little bit. And one day she came to the door with my mail and she said, "How you doing?" And it was shortly after this happened. Or I think she knew I was pregnant because
Yeah.
she asked curious questions.
Yeah.
She,
And there's a lot of follow-up.
right.
Yeah.
So she's like, "How's the pregnancy doing?" And I just, said, "Oh, well, I'm not pregnant anymore." And she instantly started crying.
Hmm.
She didn't say anything else. She just was the mail lady. She's standing
Yeah.
there holding my mail and she's crying. And that felt like empathy. It's
Yeah.
like she was a stranger, kind of.
She felt it.
She felt it. And maybe she had a personal experience with
Mhm.
that kind of loss or something. But
Did you ask a follow-up question to her?
I mean, the hard thing about that kind of empathy sometimes is then you're caretaking
Yeah.
for that person.
Yeah.
But the point is that she really felt my feelings and she entered in and didn't, kind of ask too many probing questions.
Mhm.
She just felt it with me
Yeah.
and just stood there and cried. And that was a better response than some closer people who try to kind of make you feel better or try to make sense of it or give you an answer as to why those things might happen,
Or a Bible verse.
at least you can have another child.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
yeah. So that's the idea of empathy. And it's really, or asking more like validating. I can see that you're really sad about that.
Mhm.
Is,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring you a meal tomorrow.
Noticing and yes, and bringing a meal, because it's a lot of times we say, "Well, let me know what I can do
Let
for
me know
you,"
if I can do
which is
anything.
not empathy and not good communication. I know you're trying to
Giving that
communicate.
person a task.
Yeah. and you're wanting to say I care,
Yeah.
but it doesn't land that way a lot of the times. And so
Yeah.
being able to say, "I'd like to bring you dinner next week," or
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
Yeah.
One of the dangers, so occasionally I may tell my students empathy is overrated. It may
You
be
tell your
something.
therapist that.
Yeah, I tell the therapist students that.
I
Well,
can see where you're going with this, though.
and it's along the lines of the mail carrier, that if you feel too much, you're not able to do the things you need to do. So in
Yeah.
a therapeutic relationship, or even in a couple's relationship or a parent-child relationship, if I feel what the other person's feeling so much, it's paralyzing, and
Yeah.
it can be then the other person that's hurting that I'm trying to connect with is having to take care of me, and that's a problem. And so I want to be able to be present, but I don't want to feel to the point where I'm overwhelmed by your feelings. So it's
Well, and as in caretaking jobs,
yeah,
we can't feel that kind of depth of feeling for everyone we serve, or we won't be able to function.
yeah,
And there are people who live with a higher sensitivity to emotion, and it is
Yeah.
hard for them to function
yeah,
in the world because they take on a lot of other people's emotions, and that can be a big burden.
yeah.
So it's hard to find that. And I remember you struggling with it early in your days of doing therapy, of struggling. Where's that line where I kind of have to not enter in so deeply that I can't, function in my own life?
Yeah, it's painful that way, and I work with teenagers a lot, and so part of what working with the teenagers is helping them have a very simple practice for this empathy. I feel when because. I feel, and then you're able to say the feeling when this happens because it means this. And they usually do it pretty well, but sometimes it's like, I feel upset when you do this because you're a jerk. And it's like, oh, so close
Yeah.
but it's being able to identify the feeling and say that with each other. So we have curiosity, we have the H, which
Humility.
humility, because now I think honesty and humility, curiosity, humility, empathy. The next is a 2-letter word to continue our C.H.E.E.R.S acronym, and it's emotional regulation. And so this kind of goes with the empathy of, if you are not able to attune empathetically too much, you might be dysregulated. You might be feeling too much. It might touch a trauma in your life.
Right, right. So it's being able to manage that so that you can have kind of a calm conversation,
Yeah.
your own attachment to those feelings, and being in a regulated place so that you can have a clear communication.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens naturally. Sometimes when there's a heated conversation or there's a lot of conflict or it's digging up old stuff, it's really hard to stay in that place where you can hear
Yeah.
and where you can respond the way you're not going to have regrets.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. So for me as a therapist, I'm really good and at regulating and had help with a Fitbit, like an Apple Watch type of thing when I was training. But when it's you and I, it's much more difficult because
Yeah.
the I care so much more. And I mean, I care for my clients, but I care much
Well,
more
it's
for you.
personal.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it touches on vulnerability
Yeah.
pieces. So for me, loss and not having you there is a fear that gets me dysregulated, and so I'll go quiet because basically my emotions hijack my ability to be curious, to be humble, to be empathetic, and it's just like I shut down. We'll have a conversation. You're like, "Hello," and I'm dysregulated. I'm shutting down. We don't do the high octane fighting.
Right. So some people in response, to high emotion or conflict get into that sort of fight. If we're talking fight, flight, or freeze, the fight or flight is, oh, I'm ready to go. Like, and the emotions get high, that red, you see red, that whole thing, and you don't even know what you said. You might be physically active. Your words are getting carried away. The other response is the freeze, kind of like,
Yeah.
I can't really focus or think now, so everything's kind of
Yeah.
in protective mode.
And the shallow part of that is, man, I know I can use my words to hurt and I want to be very careful. And so I'm feeling overwhelmed. And so I'm just going to not say anything. And so this emotional regulation is, how do I settle down my heart rate? How do I tell my body and my mind that, oh, Tara is not a threat, right? In this conversation. And your stance in terms of curiosity, humility, empathy helps in that.
Yeah.
But if it touches something that's a deep wound from other places or our past, that can be something that derails communication. And the the technique to navigate that is a timeout.
Right. Right. So sometimes you just have to take a break, because all these things, the curiosity, the humility, the empathy, are nice ideas, but if you're out of your window of tolerance, if you're not regulated, those aren't going to happen.
Yeah.
And then you can really hurt each other more, because the really aggressive stance can be hurtful, the disconnected response can be hurtful.
Yeah.
So how do you get back to a place where you can be on an even playing field? So sometimes it means saying, and we've done this a few times, where we're like, we're not getting anywhere that's healthy.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a break. But the sort of the suggestion, the rule with taking a break is you have to agree to come back.
Yeah.
You can't just escape and never come back to the conversation, right?
I made this mistake in helping a couple have a timeout. I forgot to say come back. And so they both kind of just left.
Yeah.
Or they went to a place that the other needed. Like they took a timeout, but one partner went to the bathroom and the other needed to go to the bathroom. It's like, we're on a break. And it's like, I got to pee. And they just kind of had, it didn't decrease. So
it escalated.
yeah. So when I talk about this, I learn from my mistakes. And couples, it's really good. So if you're thinking about navigating a timeout with your partner, do it in a calm time. Like set up the rules of the game when you're not in the middle of the game. So it's like, we need a signal of how we're going to call a timeout. We need to know the place that we're going to, that we both agree upon, how long we're going to go and when we're going to re-engage. And when we're regulated, having that conversation. So it's like basketball. I know we're not basketball fans, but basketball is a good metaphor. They're playing a game. Things are getting out of control. One team calls a timeout. They know they're supposed to go to their
own bench. Yeah.
They don't go to the concession stand, and they don't go out to the parking lot. And they know it's usually a 30 or 60-second timeout, and then they start playing again.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in relationship.
Yeah. Well, and even it doesn't even have to mean that you go into separate rooms or, be gone from each other for a couple hours or a couple days. It can be in the moment, even just taking a minute. For us too, you're the way you communicate, you're much quicker with your thoughts and much quicker on your feet with your words. I'm a thinker. Sometimes I can't even.
Hey.
Well, you think,
I know.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It takes me a while sometimes
You're
to
an internal
process.
processor.
Yeah,
I'm a verbal processor.
that's a good way to put it. Sometimes I need more time to process and think through what we're discussing, so I know how I even to process how I feel about it before we discuss it. So our styles are different. So sometimes we would just need to say, you know, you probably need to slow down. I need a little time to think, and then we'll talk when we kind of have both come to a better place.
Yep.
And sometimes it could just be a few minutes. And part of that emotional regulation could happen right in the moment too, with just using skills of, as you did, like when you're in a heated situation in therapy, knowing that your breathing and your heart rate are a little out of control and knowing how to kind of calm that down, get your nervous system back in a good place. So just some deep regulated breathing. Those are skills that seem super basic, but they're super helpful.
Well, and I know for Tara, you kind of watch a Chris Helmsworth video that helps you calm down.
Just throw that out there. So you are referring to.
I want people to picture
so
that.
I have to explain this now. So I teach box breathing in my childbirth class, where the idea of box breathing is an inhale for the count of 4, hold for the count of 4, exhale for the count of 4, and hold again. And so it can look, if a good visual is a square like that, and it's a technique that's taught even for, in
Navy SEALs.
The Navy SEALs, in the military, for staying regulated so that you can react well to high stress situations. And so you watch a YouTube show called The Hot Ones. See, I have to do this whole backstory now. I hope you're happy about that.
I am. It makes me so happy.
It's called The Hot Ones, in which an interviewer asks just questions of stars. And while they're answering these interview questions, they're eating hot, spicy wings in order from mild to really super spicy.
Yeah, like bottom burning hot.
Yeah. So I don't know, there's 10 of them or something like that. And so some of them cope really well. Some of them really struggle as they get into the really spicy wings.
Yeah.
And Chris Hemsworth, who is, notably a action hero star.
Very fit.
Is one of the people on the show. And when we were watching it one time, I was so excited to see him practicing box breathing to cope with
hot wings,
dealing with the spiciness. And as it progressed in spiciness, it was like labor, where he needed more and more coping skills and support. And so I used that video in birth class.
Well, and it's funny because he goes from the 4, breathe in for 4, hold for 4, down 4, to the end. It's like in 1, out 1, in 1, out 1. And it's just like, oh, you're hyperventilating. That is not emotional regulation. But it is a really good model in terms of when we're under stress. And this is a funny one because it's hot wings, but it can be a look you give me or something I say. Couples all the time, especially if you've been married a long time, you know where all the owies are.
They have a shorthand too.
And it can be a look. And how do we regulate? So we have curiosity, humility, empathy, emotional regulation. So all of that is kind of what's my relational stance to you, relational stance to me? How am I connecting to your emotions? How am I aware of my body? All of that happens before we get to the S.
Right. So all of that is the perspective and the stance before we even say our piece.
Yeah.
Share. Yeah. S is for sharing from an I perspective.
Yeah. What does that mean?
It's not your eyeball.
It doesn't make a lot of noise either.
Yeah. So you should probably explain this because
thank you. I was hoping you would ask me.
Thank you for lobbing it to me, but I'm going to pass it back.
Oh, I love when you're curious. So an I position comes from Murray Bowen, and I won't give a long family therapy lecture, but if you'd like, I could another time.
We'll link to something in the show notes.
Maybe we'll have a special membership episode where I talk for 3 hours about Bowen. But Murray Bowen talks about this kind of being intentional in our communication. And so a lot of what we're talking about of reactivity, of our physiological reactivity, our relational reactivity, the sharing is I'm struggling with this, Tara. I don't know how to make sense of it, that when we're talking about finance, we always get into a fight, and it really upsets me. I'm taking a position of saying, here's where I'm coming from.
Right.
Here's what's going on in this situation. It's centered around my experience. And a lot of times we go into a conversation of like, why are you always complaining about money? And the same
Yeah.
content can be presented and experienced very differently.
Right. If
So
you start with you and always or never,
yeah,
that's usually a bad place to
them's
start.
fighting words. Them's not communicating words. And so the I position is, I want you to understand. It kind of is the converse of curiosity. Curiosity is, I want to understand.
Mm-hmm.
I position is, I want you to experience my thoughts and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, though, we go about it as, I'm hurt, so I want you to hurt, rather
Right.
than I want you to understand where I'm coming from, because I'm not sure you're going to be empathetic. And so I'm going to go on again on the attack. So I'm probably
Mm-hmm.
responding dysregulated without trust that you'll be empathetic. And so I go with the you.
Yeah.
And most conversations, especially if you have short time,
Yeah.
is, you're always doing this. Why are you doing this? Knock it off. And it's not, I'm really upset about this, or I'm struggling with this, or I don't like it when this happens, or I would prefer this,
Mm-hmm.
which centers it on a vulnerable, like, I'm taking ownership of what I want to communicate to you versus blaming you for whatever the situation is.
Right.
So there's my quick elevator talk.
Yeah. I mean, that is something that I think most people kind of know in their head, that it's not good to start with always or never, or you did this, because that's a blaming stance that immediately brings up defensiveness.
Yeah.
If somebody starts with you did this and
Even
it's a
your
blame,
finger
right?
point, right? It's like,
it's aggressive, and
yeah.
your response is, I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to protect myself.
Yeah.
And it that's naturally what comes up as a response. So if somebody says, if I say, it hurts me when you do this, that's not something somebody can really argue with,
No.
how you feel about it. So it's just pointing out, this is how I feel. Is there
Yeah.
anything we can do to change this? Or can we find out what's happening for you when that behavior keeps happening? Or it leads more to a conversation
Yeah.
or to a place of understanding than immediate defensiveness, which is hard to back away from. Once you're in that stance, it's
Yeah.
hard to back off of that.
Well, and defensiveness, really, the antidote is personal responsibility of like, okay, I have to look at this. And if I'm feeling vulnerable, that's hard without the other parts of cheers. So hopefully everybody sees these all go together. It's not you just do one, but as you practice this and as you build this, it makes it easier. Like, we don't think through this anymore of like, oh, am I being curious? Am I being humble? It's, oh, I feel safe. Or when I don't, for me, it's a self-check. When I don't use I statements, I'm like, all right, I'm feeling disconnected from Tara. I don't know if she really gets me. And then that's the conversation to have before we get into money or kids or all the things couples fight over.
Yeah. Well, and one thing to note as we wrap this up too is that, we're talking about conflict. When we talk about healthy communication, we're bringing up when we have conflict or not great communication. But conflict itself isn't bad.
No.
If you live or, interact with somebody enough, there's going to be things you disagree on. So I think some people avoid it so much. And I think I tend to be an avoider of conflict. That's my natural bent. So it's hard to decide to enter in. But conflict itself isn't bad. It needs to happen sometimes. When it can happen in a healthy way, it can lead to really good change. But I think what you talk about a lot in therapy too is that it's not the conflict that's the problem as much as, do you repair afterwards? Do you come back to it and repair or admit you were wrong or kind of come back to the relationship? So this cheers can even be part of the repair process.
Yeah.
If there's already been conflict and we've already done it in a way that was hurtful to each other, coming back with curiosity and humility is a good way to start with repair.
And it really is about building that safety. I agree with you 100%, because I worked with a couple where I helped them not fight anymore but we didn't build any relational part, and their relationship ended because the conflict was their
Was
emotional
there?
connection.
Mm,
And so thinking about what is the conflict of, I don't like it, but if that's the only place we're connecting, we need to really work on those first things, to connect first, to have empathy, to be curious, that then we can replace the fighting with
yeah.
fun.
If you take out any bad habit, you got to replace it with a good one.
Yeah.
Or
Otherwise, it's
there's,
useless. Yeah.
yeah.
We always replace things, and
Hmm.
hopefully it's with something better. So,
Yeah.
curiosity, humility, empathy, emotional regulation, and sharing. These
Yeah.
are the components to
I feel
cheers.
like we've got to
Cheers.
cheers to your health.
To your health. Love you.